All right, so today we have a double portion as we conclude the book of Bamidbar, or Numbers, Mattot and Massei. And it begins in Numbers chapter 30, verse 1, and it goes on over to the end of the book of Numbers. So this, again, is a double portion. Mattot, which means tribes, and Massei, which means journeys or stations, according to some translations. And these double portions begin by discussing the sanctity of a vow. In Hebrew, if you're a Hebrew student, that word is neder, neder. It's a vow, it's an oath. It's a bit more than a promise. And as we read here, we see, and there are other passages to kind of substantiate this, there are things that a person can prohibit for themselves that the Torah would allow. In other words, if you consider the vows of a Nazirite, a Nazir, he would abstain from things that come from the grape. He wouldn't cut his hair. Of course, he couldn't touch anything that was dead. Where others in the nation were permitted to do such things in certain times. So you could prohibit something for yourself. You could make a vow and say, I'm not going to do that, even though, according to the Torah, it's lawful. And then that person can obligate himself to do something in addition to what the Torah demands. And so the point, though, is this. When someone makes a solemn promise, when someone consecrates themselves to do something to God, do something in his service, it is expected that that person keep their vow. And so such a vow is made here as Israel is preparing to enter the land. So we're going to read in Numbers 32. I'm going to read verse 1 and 2, and then we'll go to verse 4 and 5. It says, Now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of livestock. And when they saw the land of Yazir and the land of Gilead, that indeed the region was a place for livestock, the children of Gad and the children of Reuben came and spoke to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, and to the leaders of the congregation, saying, and I'm going to go down to verse 4, the country which the Lord defeated before the congregation of Israel is a land for livestock, and your servants have livestock. Therefore they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not take us over the Jordan. And so these three groups, Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they're requesting to remain on the eastern bank of the Jordan. Of course, part of the area that they're talking about would later be known as Gilead. And of course, this was the home of Elijah, the prophet, who was the Gileadite. And so it's, if you've ever been to Israel and you've been in this area, it's a land that's covered with forests, there are orchards, there are vineyards, there's hills. And my understanding is that out of this area came perfumes and medicines in the ancient world. So you could understand that it was a nice looking place and why it would be attractive for these people. But of course, we have a history in the Bible that all that glitters is not gold, right? Because Lot said, I'll go down there. And Abraham said, well, okay, I'll stay here. That didn't turn out so well for Lot, but that's another story. But anyway, in response to their request, Moses asked them this question. This is verses 6 and 8. Shall your brethren go to war while you sit here? Now why will you discourage the heart of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord has given them? Thus your fathers did when I sent them away from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. So here's Moses' problem. Basically, he's saying, what gives you the right to be exempted from the war of conquest? Or let's put it this way, in a way that maybe it would make better sense for us or have a bigger impact. Why should you just sit around and let all the other people do the work and you reap the rewards? That hurt, didn't it? But the principle is the same, right? It is my understanding. Now, I would say that this congregation does not fit into this category, what I'm about to say. But all my life, I've heard how that in most congregations and churches, about 10% of the people do 90% of the work. This congregation, thankfully, it is not that way. And I hope and I pray that it never will be that way. All right? But that's basically what Moses is saying. You want to just kind of park it here, and we're going to go over and fight the battle so that you can stay here. I don't like that idea. Besides, that's going to prompt others to want to do the same thing. And if others do the same thing, then we're going to end up in the same situation that caused us to be wandering all these past 38 years. This doesn't work for me. So, I'm paraphrasing, of course. So the tribes responded to Moses with a promise, with a neder, with a vow. Let us settle here with our families. Let us move into these cities. Let us build pens. And if you'll let us do that and settle our families here, we'll go at the head of the column and we'll go with you to fight the war. As it turns out, they committed themselves to fight a 7 years war. That's quite the promise, right? So then, Moses responds to that and says, okay, but he reminds them of the vow that they've just made. So in Numbers 32, verses 20 through 23, hold on just a moment. I'm going to try to stand for a little bit today. And that thing is in my way. But thank you for thinking of me, whoever put it there. Moses says, if you do this thing, if you keep this vow that you're making, if you arm yourselves before the Lord for the war, and all your armed men cross over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven out his enemies from before him, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then afterward you may return and be blameless before the Lord and before Israel, and this land shall be your possession before the Lord. But if you do not do so, then take note, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. So a couple of things that occur to me here I want to mention very quickly. They make this vow, if you'll let us do this, then we will fight at the head of the column. And so Moses more or less says, okay, let's make certain that we're on the same page here. I want to be very specific. If you do that, if you arm yourself, if you fight until the land is subdued and all your brethren are able to settle it, if that is what you do, then you can go back, you'll be blameless before the Lord and blameless before your countrymen. It's always a good idea to be blameless before God, but it's kind of important to be that way before your fellow man as well, especially in a congregational setting, I would say, all right? But if you do not do so, then take note. You have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Now, I've heard that passage all my life too. Yeah, you can go and do that, but be sure your sin will find you out. Now, where these men were concerned, keeping their word, just keeping their word, fulfilling their vow, that was the only way that they would be clear before the Lord. They had committed themselves to something. And also keeping their word, keeping their vow, would keep them above reproach in the eyes of their countrymen. Now, later on, we read that they actually did keep their vow, and they were released to go back and settle on the other side of the Jordan. But my point here is, and the point that the Torah makes here for us, when we promise the Lord that we will do something, and then the crisis passes, because that's usually when we make promises, when it's a crisis, and we just start saying, if you'll do this, I'll do that. Please do this and I'll do that. That's usually what happens. But when we promise him we will do something and then the crisis passes and we forget about it, or we don't forget about it, we just don't actually follow through, that's a problem because it is a sin against God. And so that vow, that oath, that promise that we make, even when it's in desperation, it needs to be honored because that's the only way to be clear before the Lord in this context anyway. That is to keep your word, to keep your vow. And if you don't do that, Moses says, the sin will find you out. And that is a phrase that has always intrigued me. It will find you out. The Hebrew word that is translated find you, oddly enough, is pronounced matzah. It's not the same as unleavened bread. That's spelled with a hey at the end of it, not an aleph. But it is kind of interesting to me that it's pronounced matzah. But this word, mem zade aleph, it means to find something deliberately, to search out something deliberately. It's intentional. It's not random. It's something that is found out because that particular thing has been searched for and then pursued. And so then, it is as if sin has an individual existence and the sinner cannot escape it. It will run you down. It's like Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive. Well, I don't watch movies. Well, anyway, for those of you who do, you know what I'm talking about. He's very persistent. He's not going to give up. He keeps coming after the fugitive. Well, that's what Moses is more or less saying by using this word, that sin is going to hunt you down. It is going to find you, and it is going to overtake you. And I find that very interesting in light of some other things that are covered in this portion. Specifically, when Israel enters the land, and this is in the Torah portion, or the portions, there were certain cities that were dedicated as cities of refuge. And if there's a manslayer, he kills somebody, whether it was intentional or unintentional, it's not necessarily stated at the beginning. But anyway, that manslayer could run to that city of refuge and await a hearing. And until that hearing, he would be safe. Who was he running from? The avenger of blood, it says. And insinuating the person, the manslayer, if he didn't find his way to the city of refuge, that avenger of blood was tracking him, pursuing him, searching for him. And if he found him, what would he do? He would exact vengeance, wouldn't he? And so then, he needed to get to the city of refuge. But he's warned, that is the manslayer, if he disregarded the boundaries and what the city of refuge was all about, and he ventured out, then he would make himself vulnerable. This is in Numbers 35, verses 26 through 28. But if the manslayer at any time goes outside the limits of the city of refuge when he has fled, and the avenger of blood finds him outside the limits of his city of refuge, and the avenger of blood kills the manslayer, he, that is the avenger of blood, shall not be guilty of blood, because he should have remained in his city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer may return to the land of his possession. It's apples and oranges, I realize, but it's kind of like that, the notion of be sure your sin will find you out. You vowed to do this. If you don't fulfill that vow, your sin will find you out. It'll track you down. After you fulfilled your vow, then you can go back to your place of residence. As long as he remained in the city of refuge, he was safe. If we keep our vow, if we do what is right. Because all of us, if you're a believer, if you profess to be a believer of the Messiah, then you have made a vow. I do. Because it is a betrothal, is it not? We're in a covenantal relationship, and we have made a vow. So if we do what is right, and if we are in Messiah, that's more important actually. If we are in Messiah and we stay true to him, he is our city of refuge, as it were. If we do what is right, then we have a promise that we will not be overtaken by those sins of the past. But I want you to consider that even though we've all been forgiven of things of the past, and you don't have to raise your hand, you can look straight ahead. But how many of us still have to deal with consequences of the past? I said don't raise your hand. Even though we're forgiven, and in Messiah we stand blameless before our Heavenly Father, there are oftentimes consequences. And the fact that we often have to suffer the consequences of sins is no doubt to remind us, well, this is how I interpret it anyway. Maybe I should think before I speak. Maybe I should think before I act and not be impulsive and just do, and just say. I probably say this every Shabbat, or very, very commonly. How many times we've been angry or very highly emotionally charged and spoken or done in that state? Have we thought later, wow, that was wise of me. What a wonderful decision that was to say that thing or to do that act. That was great, wasn't it? How often do you do that after you've responded that way? I've never have. I can't remember one time. So perhaps it is a good thing to think before we speak, to think before we act, to think before we pledge or vow. We're told we're to count the costs, because what you and I have, this journey that we've begun and have been out for sometimes, many of us, is the hardest thing we're ever going to do. the hardest thing we're ever going to do. And it's easy to keep the promise when everything's going easily. It becomes another matter when things get hard. So the point was that maybe we are permitted, allowed, compelled to suffer the consequences of some of our sins, so that as we do, we'll be reminded to think before you speak. Think before you act, lest we be exposed to the pain and discomfort of our sin overtaking us. Let's put it this way. Lingering consequences are like a thorn in our side. We all agree and understand that it is critical to keep all that the Lord has commanded us to do. But this Torah portion kind of conveys the idea that it is equally important that we do everything we have promised to do. How many times have you made a vow to the Lord in the emotion of the moment? How many of those vows have you forgotten? It scares me to think of things that I've said, vowed, promised God when I was in the midst of a crisis passed, and then I forgot it. I don't think I'm the only one there. It's a shuddering thought. So in this Torah portion, here's something that gives me hope, and I'm going to hold fast to it. I'm going to claim it. You see, if a daughter or a wife said something in haste, and the husband or the father heard it, guess what? He could override it. So for all those things that we promised and vowed in that emotional state of mind and then forgotten it, or we realize we said it in haste, I'm going to ask the Father in heaven to forgive me of all those things, to override those things, to negate those vows, and forgive me of those things. Amen? To forgive me of the failures. And I hope that in time that He will, as He brings it to my attention, allow me the opportunity to renew my efforts and to do the things that I need to do. Is that a little too transparent for you? All right. And we need to consider this because we are warned in this portion that when we neglect to fulfill our obligations to the Lord, there are consequences. And these consequences will often serve as reminders of what we're supposed to do, who we're supposed to be, what's right, what's wrong, all these things. Remember, in the garden, Adam was told to work and to guard. And it seems to me that he was diligent to do the work, but he wasn't as faithful to guard. And that's why you ended up with the serpent in the midst of the garden talking to his wife. And consequently, because he didn't do everything that the Lord instructed him to do, be diligent to do these things, Moses would tell them again and again and again. But because Adam was not, consequently, he and his wife were exiled from the land. They were put outside of the garden. They were not allowed to possess the inheritance, as it were. They were put outside the land. And once outside the garden, then they encounter all these consequences. They encounter all these reminders of how things were. The consequences of choices that were made, things that were done. Genesis chapter 3, verse 17 and 18. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you. So years ago, when I was working on this project called Enmity Between the Seeds, I did a lot of word studies and a lot of things as it related to what was going on here in the beginning in the garden. And the Hebrew words that are translated as thorns and thistles I found quite interesting because both of them convey the idea of something that will prick you, something that will sting you, something that is very uncomfortable. You can still function. He still toiled. He ate bread by the sweat of his brow. He could still do things, but it was always with thorns and thistles in his way. It was always, having to work through the briars and contend with all those things that are not fruitful, that aren't good for food, things that are annoying, nagging, getting you away, sometimes make you bleed. These are reminders of how things were. You thought you had it so bad because I gave you some instructions. If you kept my instructions, you could walk around the garden and you could freely eat from all the trees. But no, what did you focus on? What I said you couldn't have. And so rather than focusing on what you do have and all the benefits, you chose to look at what you didn't have. And so from now on, you're going to have to contend. Oh, you're still going to function. You're still going to eat as long as you work very hard, but you're going to have to contend with all these briars, these thorns and thistles, and they're going to poke you, and they're going to stick you, and they're going to grab you, and sometimes they're going to make you bleed and make you remember, I didn't have it so bad after all. You're still going to have to contend with them. Things that grab at your side. Now, on our property, there are places that to get to it, there is no way around it. You are going to walk through briars and those wild blackberry bushes, and they are the most annoying thing. And I can get all girded up, wear thick jeans and denim and all this kind of stuff, but one of them is going to find a way to reach up under that shirt and grab me in the side. It always happens. And so these things are reminders that things are not as they used to be in relation to the garden. And they're a reminder of how things should be. And that idea brings us to something else we see in our portions today. Numbers 33, beginning in verse 50. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan, across from Jericho, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you have crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, destroy all their engraved stones, destroy all their molded images, and demolish all their high places. You shall dispossess the inhabitants of the land and dwell in it, for I have given you the land to possess. So the land he's referring to, the land of Canaan, is the land that God had deeded to Abraham and to his seed, nobody else. And there are a lot of people in this world, even to this day, that take issue with that. They'll have to take it up with the creator of the universe, because he said this land is for Abraham and his seed. David said the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. That means to me, he can do what he wants. He can say this belongs to you, this belongs to you. And it won't matter what they have to say about it. He's already spoken on the matter. And so this land is deeded, not just was, but is deeded to Abraham and to his seed. Because this is the land that epitomizes their purpose. And what is that? To be a light to the nations. I've shared this a few times as well, but it seems appropriate to bring it out again. You think of all the places in the earth that God could set his people, and he chose to put them right in the middle of everything. I mean, their western border is the Mediterranean Sea. Mediterranean means Middle Earth. Now, some of these people are geeking out right now, I know. But it's in the middle of the earth. And look at the neighborhood. It's one of the roughest neighborhoods on the face of the earth. And he did that on purpose. And why? Because his people were to be a light to those in darkness. And so that is the land that he gave to Abraham and to his seed, because it epitomizes their purpose, our purpose for that matter. And so as he tells them, as they go into the land, he tells them to destroy everything that is offensive to the Holy One of Israel, destroy everything that works or would work to undermine that purpose, that would oppose God's purpose for them and for the land. And I think it's also important to point out that he only gives this instruction to them as it relates to the land of Canaan, the land that they were to possess. In other words, he didn't tell them to go smash all the Babylonian idols over in Babylon. He didn't tell them to tear down all the gods in Egypt. He took care of that. But do you understand what I'm trying to say? This was the only time he says, I want you to smash all their idols, break down all their graven images, all these things, because it was the land that he had given to them to possess. When Paul was in Athens, he did not go smashing all the Greek idols. At best, all he said is, you've got this one dedicated to the unknown God. Let me tell you about him. But when it comes to the land that God has given to his people, he says, get rid of all that stuff. Break them down. And that's the point. While they only destroyed the idols that were in the land of their possession, they were to be very diligent in that, to be very thorough in that. And not just the idols, but to drive out the inhabitants. And he goes on and he kind of doubles down on it. He gives them a very, very stern warning as it relates to that. This is in Numbers 33, verses 55 and 6. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall be that those whom you let remain shall be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your sides, things that grab at you. And they shall harass you in the land where you dwell. They'll harass you. Why? Because you left them there. Why did you leave them there? To harass you. Well, that's the end result. That's not what we were thinking. We thought, I'm tired. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Okay. I'll remind you of what you're supposed to do. They will harass you in the land where you dwell. Moreover, it shall be, if you don't do what I told you to do, that I will do to you as I thought to do to them. I know I don't have to remind this group of this, but there are some who would read that and go, well, that was the way it was in the Old Testament. We're supposed to just love everybody now and be relevant in the... She's back. Do something with your wife, please. You know you can override things she says. The point is, yesterday and today, God clearly places great importance on taking possession of that which he has entrusted to us. He has deeded certain things to us, and we're supposed to take care of it according to his standards and not our own, because he considers those things that he's entrusted to us sacred. We can apply this to families. We can apply this to congregations, certainly to a nation. But if he has given something to us and says, this is something I want you to take possession of, that he's very serious about it. And he's very serious about what we should allow and what we should remove. So to kind of underscore that, those things that he has given to us, our inheritance, I will use that word. The fact that he considers it sacred is kind of underscored in the Torah portions, because you have a situation where those who are of the tribe of Manasseh came to Moses and said, look, remember when you told the daughters of Zelophehad that because he didn't have any sons, that they would end up with that inheritance? Well, what happens if they decide they want to marry sons of another tribe? If that happens, then the inheritance that was given or allotted to the tribe of Manasseh is going to be given over to another tribe. And so they raised this issue, and so the concern was put to rest, because Moses determined they would marry only within that tribe. What am I saying? If that was the decision that was rendered, they could only marry within their tribe, then God puts a great premium on an inheritance. That he has given to us. It's not something that should be squandered away. It's not something that should be treated or regarded lightly if it's sacred. It should be treated as sacred. And so this situation that we see here with the daughters of Zelophehad, it kind of amplifies the fact that God does consider an inheritance that he's given to us as something to be held sacred. In my mind, it runs parallel to what we see regarding the birthright that was given to Abraham's seed. Esau despised his birthright. And what does God have to say about Esau? Not good things. Jacob embraced it. And what does God have to say about Jacob? But holding on to our inheritance, it can come at a great price. These daughters Zelophehad, they could not marry outside of that tribe. So hopefully they found somebody good, but, they couldn't go over there to the tribe of Reuben and think they're going to marry there. So that it comes with a cost. Naboth had a vineyard. Ahab wanted it. He told the king, no, I'm not going to sell you my inheritance. This is something the Lord has given to me and to my family. I'm not going to just, put it out there for sale. And he paid for that decision with his life. So what I'm trying to say here is that you and I, if we take the principle and apply it, we are not only encouraged, we are challenged. We're kind of commanded of those things that he has entrusted to us, those things that are sacred, our family, this assembly, whatever it is, we're to hold fast to it. It's not something that we should just treat flippantly. And we should hold fast to it no matter the cost. But also, holding on to it means driving out those things that would undermine his purpose. Driving out everything that works against him and his purpose. And then everything that we allow to remain in our inheritance, he says, will become an irritant. That's not just Old Testament. That's just truth. The word that is translated as irritant is actually something that's kind of like a thorn, a barb. It's something that's pointy and it's sharp and it sticks, it pierces. And so the warning is that if you fail to drive these inhabitants of the land out of the land, then eventually it means you're not going to be able to remain in your inheritance. I'll do to you what I sought to do to them, is what he says. And so they have a pretty hefty responsibility to drive the Canaanites out of the land, because if they don't, they're going to be the ones leaving the land, not the Canaanites. And all along the way, there are going to be these barbs and these irritants and all these things that are sticking at you. Pricks in your eyes, he says. That sounds pretty painful. Pricks in your eyes. It has the connotation of, this hedge of thorns and thistles and pricks and these things that are, uncomfortable. But it carries with it the idea of being pinned in or being hemmed in, not being able to go any further because you've got these things that are in the way. In other words, things that we allow, if we allow these things that he says to get rid of to remain in our lives, they're going to kind of work against what we say we're for. And that is fulfilling his will and purpose in our lives. But if we let these things remain, they're going to impede that. They're going to kind of keep us from being who we are meant to be. Because when we have pricks in our eyes, we don't see things very clearly. Think of Samson. Samson is, and I don't want to get too far off track here, but Samson is a story of a guy, basically a man called of God from his birth, called for a specific purpose. And in my opinion, he fought God all the way. He's not supposed to be going and having anything pertaining to the grapes, specifically wine, but he goes to a Philistine wedding. You're going to tell me they didn't have wine at that place. Not to mention he's consorting and then marrying a Philistine woman. And his mom and dad are having, they're having a flying duck fit over that. That's a southernism, Margaret. Okay? You can carry that back to California with you, okay? See how many looks you get when you have a flying duck fit, all right? Who's I talking about? Samson. Anyway. Samson is someone called of God for a specific purpose, and he really fights God all the way because he let his guard down. He allowed things to remain in his life, and it ends up, his eyes are literally put out. It's only when he was blind was he able to see. But again, that's another story. And again, these pricks in your eyes, these barbs, these thorns and thistles, it's again reminiscent of what happens or what Adam has to contend with after the fall. So then, Israel, if they were to fulfill their purpose, they were to rid the land of all the irritants, all the corruptive influences, not just some of them. And by the way, to date, has Israel done that? still waiting for that one to be fulfilled, aren't we? And here you and I are in the world at this time, still waiting for these things to be accomplished through and by his people. So he says, get rid of them all, not just some of them. And that's where it gets hard. Ridding our inheritance of all of these irritants. Because when we think that we've done a pretty good job, then he shows us something else. And we go, ooh, that's going to be tough. Okay, I'm going to do it. And then we do that one, and he says, well, then there's this here. And it gets harder. It gets harder. I don't know about you, but 40 years into this journey, has it been 40 years? Yeah. Things that he deals with me now, the things that he's dealing with me about now are a lot harder than the things that he was dealing with me at the beginning. It's much more difficult. So in Israel's case, they had to take vengeance on Midian because of the sin of Baal Peor, because the Midianites, of course, were those who, through this stumbling block before them, caused that plague that killed 24,000 people. And so the Bible tells us that they slew every male, including 5 Midianite chieftains or kings, and then they also killed Balaam, the seer from Mesopotamia, with the sword. But it says that the officers of the army took women and children captive, along with other spoils, and that provoked Moses to say this. This is in chapter 31, verses 15 and 16. Have you kept all the women alive? Look, these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. So what is he saying? They have to go too. So in our day and age, to read that, we go, man, that's pretty tough. To exterminate these people in a way, this way, it seems very cruel, but we have to remember where these women were concerned, that was a destructive influence. And the children of Israel, the sons of Israel, had already demonstrated that they were very vulnerable to these things. They were susceptible to that. These women of Midian had this power, or at least had shown that at one point in time they had a power over the men of Israel. So, yeah, that's hard for us to wrap our brains around, but keep this in mind, we weren't there, and it's really impossible for us to judge the situation accurately. But it's still, and this is the point, I have to believe that was a very hard thing to do. Following God, fulfilling his purpose for us, possessing our inheritance, that he has deeded to us, is entrusted to us, holding on to it, possessing it, it's going to be the hardest thing we ever do. Now, I am not recommending that you do what Pincus did. Remember? Not recommending that. Likewise, I'm not recommending that you take the same course of action where the Midianite women are concerned here. I'm just saying that the principle still applies. The principle still applies to us today. Get rid of all of the things that work against God's purpose for you, to that place, that inheritance, if you will, that which the Father has entrusted to us. Again, whether it's a family, whether it's this congregation, a ministry, what have you, to rid ourselves of those things that threaten evil, that has the potential to derail your success as it relates to God's purpose, and not just a little bit of it, not just the things that are easy, but especially the things that are hard. Because if it's hard to do, that means it probably has a piece of our heart. In some cases, it might be the difference between life and death as to whether we do it or not. If Pincus had not taken that javelin and he had not stayed the plague, then we presume that many more of Israel would have perished beyond the 24,000. So the bottom line is something that we see from the beginning that goes all the way to the end. The holy cannot coexist with the profane. This whole thing about coexist is from the father of lies. We can't do it, not as a set apart people. And so failure to rid the land of these people meant that Israel, not only were they going to fall victim to their influence, but eventually they were going to be put out of the land themselves. And so we have a choice to make. That is to separate, be careful how I say this, to be a set apart people and set ourselves apart from the ways of the world. Because if we do not do that, in time, the world will set us apart from them. And here's what I mean. People like the Nazis. What did they eventually go in and do? They set the Jews apart, but it wasn't for life. They were marking them for extermination. And so these irritants that we allow to remain in our lives, those are the very things that God will use to do to us what he had intended to do to them. Israel was put in the midst of those nations to be a light to those nations. But when Israel started acting like those nations, those are the very nations that God raised up to come against his people. That's what he's saying here. So it's not a good thing for us to allow these things to remain in our lives. So then, when God's people don't set themselves apart by choice, others set them apart, but not for good. Because in the end, Israel had to leave their homes, and their enemies, those that they were supposed to dispossess, are the ones that occupied those homes. So again, we have to drive out the corruptive influences in our life, and sometimes it's not very easy. But those things that are left unmolested, those things that God told us to get rid of, are the things that can derail what his purpose is for our life. That sin that so easily besets us. And I want to say this, I share this not as one who has arrived. I share this as one who's still in the throes of that process. Because every time I think I've done something and achieved something, overcome something, then he brings me over and shows me something else. And the next one is even tougher. And I suspect that if and when that day of overcoming that comes, hopefully soon, I have no doubt that he's going to bring me to the next one and say, now let's work on this. And it gets tougher. It gets harder. All of us are going to go to Mount Moriah. And what do I mean by that? All of us are going to be called to take Isaac up to the top of that mountain and to see if there's anything that we would withhold from him in some form or fashion. All of us are going to go in Gethsemane. And all of us are going to have to come to that place that we truly mean, not my will, but your will be done. Because that's kind of the vow we made when we said to the Messiah, I do. Because all of us who regard ourselves as a follower of Yeshua, we have made an oath that we would follow him all the way. So consequently, we cannot afford to leave our enemies alone. And by enemies, I don't mean that person who said bad things about us necessarily, or that person who doesn't like us. I'm not necessarily talking about that. I'm talking about those things that have taken up residence in our inheritance, those things that God has entrusted to us. And the Bible teaches us that these things are our weakness. And these things that are our weakness are willing to destroy us. These weaknesses don't care about us living, about us prospering. These weaknesses are very willing to destroy us. Those things that are in our hearts, our minds, our being. And so it's better for us to destroy them before they destroy us. You can fill in the blank, whatever that is. One person it's this, one person it's that. But it's those things that God has been dealing with us, and we know what he's been dealing with us about. And he keeps reminding us, do something about this. Matthew 5, verse 29 and 30. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. In other words, these little things have the ability to destroy us and are willing to destroy us. And so Messiah, is he speaking figuratively here? Is he speaking literally? I don't want to see anybody chop their hand off. But what he's saying is there are things that if we allow to remain in our lives, they have the potential to destroy. So he makes a very extreme point, but what he's really saying is don't resolve to coexist with something, whatever it is, a thing, a whoever, a whatever, because those things can eventually destroy you. Don't resolve to coexist with them. Well, this is just the way God made me. No. It is the result of choices that we have made along the way. So we have to avoid those things that we know have the potential to destroy us. As followers of Messiah, we're to take it one step further, actually. We are to avoid things that even might look wrong, to avoid the very appearance of evil, so that not only are we in right standing with God, but that we will be in right standing with our fellow man. When Yeshua went into that garden that night, one of the things that he told his disciples is that the prince of this world is coming, but he doesn't have anything in me. And what did he mean by that? Oh, he's going to make accusations because he is the accuser of the brethren. He is the father of lies. When he tells a lie, he does it at his own resources. So he's never going to stop accusing us. But the difference here is he had nothing in Messiah. There was no substance to his accusations. It was all a lie. And there is something about facing what Messiah had to face, knowing that the adversary has nothing in him. Now, we've all done stuff, but we've been forgiven. And if we just remain faithful and walk upright before him, we can face what we have to, knowing that we can stand blameless before our God and the adversary has nothing in us. If we rid ourselves, our lives, our inheritance of these things that he's telling us to dispossess. And really, this is the vow that we have made, to live a set-apart life in accordance with his perfect will, not just his permissible will. His permissible will at this point in my life says, I'll let you do it, but you're not going to like the outcome. It's not really what I had for you, but if that's what you want to do, okay. May not send you to hell, but it may not get you to where I had always purposed for you to be. And I really want to be one of those people that was said of Joshua, he left nothing undone that he was instructed to do. I really want to hear, well done. I don't want to hear, you did okay. Does anybody want to hear that? No, of course not. So we have made a vow, and we should keep our vow. See things through to the end. Keep the vow that we have made when we come into this covenant, realizing that we are weak. And so, thankfully, we can call upon the one who can help us in our weaknesses and who can kind of help us get through this world with all the thorns and the thistles and the barbs pulling at us. And so I can't talk about thorns without going to what Paul had to say. in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Verse 7, "And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations," in other words, unless I should really think too much of myself considering all that God has revealed to me. And let's face it, we've all met people that God has certainly used, but, well, He says, "Lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure." In other words, God allowed things to happen to me so that I'd just remember who I really was, not think too highly of myself. "Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Messiah may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Messiah's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." I don't want to give ground to my infirmities, but I want to acknowledge my infirmities. Because in acknowledging my infirmities, I am inviting the Spirit and power of Messiah to rest upon me. And you see a fellow in front of you with plenty of infirmities who every time I walk up here wonder why in the world you would put somebody like me. Now I can understand why you would use Beth. But I do question it. But when I read this, I'm reminded, he reminds us that we're weak so that we will be reminded that he is strong, right? And we can do all things through the Messiah who strengthens us. So, as I said earlier, there are thorns in our sides that are there to remind us, you haven't always made the right choices. Things aren't the way they should be. But these are also reminders of what you need to do so things can be the way they're supposed to be. And so right here, Paul, again, he's being reminded, don't get so puffed up, Paul. Yes, God's using you in a great and mighty way and continues to use Paul in a great and mighty way. But Paul is saying that God allowed Satan to buffet him. That literally means to beat with the fist, to pound him in the face, as it were, metaphorically. So just don't get to thinking too much about yourself. Those thorns remind you of the reality of who and what you are. You're weak so that I can be strong. And that's what I want to kind of close with. In everything that he's called us to do, we acknowledge that we are weak. And without him, we're nothing. Yeshua said, without me, you can do nothing. Without him, we can do nothing. And so his strength is made perfect in our weakness. If we are going to possess our inheritance, it's going to be because Yeshua leads us into it and shows us the way and gives us the power and strength that we need. Messiah was himself crowned with thorns. He was pierced in his side, just to remind us of what he did on our behalf, so that as we acknowledge our weaknesses, we're inviting his strength by his Spirit, by his power to be in our lives. And so let's keep our vow to the Lord. Let's finish the race. Let's be faithful. And I want to close with this passage, and it's always meant a lot to me in many, many ways. And it just seemed kind of appropriate in light of the idea that this is all about inheritance, holding on to it, dispossessing those that would try to seize it. There is coming a day, according to Zechariah chapter 3, says the Lord of hosts, everyone will invite his neighbor under his vine and under his fig tree. And what that says to me, that there is coming a day that those who have persevered, those who overcome by the blood of the Messiah and the word of our testimony, and who love not their lives even unto death, there is one day that we are going to walk into our inheritance and possess it, and we're going to get to sit down under our own vine, under our own fig tree, and enjoy the rewards of being faithful. Amen.